Here's one towards the goal. That's going to be gloved by Travis Ridgen. Well, this is more like it.
This is Slangin' the Biscuit. Here's Travis Ridgen and Dave Wheeler.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Slinging the Biscuit podcast. Today's a little bit of a different interview, a different episode. Over the summer, we've had guys that have played in the NHL. We've had different minor pro guys. We had Rich Cooper on last week, which was a really good interview if you haven't had a chance to listen. But this week, we have a man who came from Bayside, Wisconsin, the pride of Milwaukee, just outside Milwaukee. Don't mean to offend you. His name is Eido Walny. He's a divorce/estate planning attorney.
He wears a lot of hats, and there's no pun intended there because he's got a great hat on, but you wear a lot of hats. Why don't you run us down your resume?
Can I also give him a shout out, too, for this amazing mug that he got me, Stan Mikita's Donuts. He came and said, Trav, I got you a nice little gift. So
Is that a shout out to Wayne's World?
It is.
Nice.
I'm originally from Chicago. So Aurora's a suburb of Chicago, and I heard you guys talking about Stan Mikita's Donuts and happen to have an extra Stan Mikita's Donuts mug.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm I own my own law firm, National Estate Planning Law Practice based out of Milwaukee. I'm the president of the Village of Bayside. I am a business consultant for a company out of California. I make my own cufflinks. I restore cars. And then in the interim, my son's a junior A hockey player, and my daughter skates for Team USA as a figure skater.
And so you reached out about a month and a bit ago, and you know, a lot of people reach out about, hey, we'd like to come on the show and mostly just chop it up. But you really had me interested because you'd seen one of our clips. I can't remember, which one was it again?
It's about Crosby and his girlfriend.
Okay, and that they've been together for how many, over a decade, but he says, no, not marrying you, going to keep you in a separate house and keep the business and the pleasure separately. And what made you want to reach out?
I mean, I think this is an area that's near and dear to me. I work with a lot of professional athletes, and I think this is an area that's greatly misunderstood both by the general public and also by professional athletes. And so when I hear people kind of riff about the subject and just sort of talk about what people should do or mean to do, I always like to try to correct the record. And that was one that I felt was really important and an opportunity to sort of spread the message. And it's not just guys like Crosby. I know Paul Kariya's been with his girlfriend for a long time, and they're also just unmarried. Solid family. She was with him when his jersey got retired, but just unmarried. Well,
it reminds me, and I'll allude to it again, Jimmy Carr saying when somebody asked him, why aren't you married? And he says, I love my girl so much. Why would I want to get lawyers involved?
It's a fair point. I mean, as a lawyer, I understand our reputation, but the fact of the matter is there's so many pitfalls for professional athletes and traps for the unwary that whether you like it or not, you either find the problem or the problem will find you.
That's a good one.
Well, in the situation of Sidney Crosby, all we can do is speculate, right? Of
course.
But in a situation like that, he has been so well insulated. He's had a lot of great people around him. Do you think this is a situation where he's being coached on this, or is...
I don't know. I don't know Crosby. I can only speculate. I know that he's a guy who's well insulated and has been for a long time. I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things where he's just waiting for his career to end so that his prime earnings can be reduced. Maybe he's one of those guys who does think, we've got a great relationship. Why muck it up with lawyers? Hard to say. And I also obviously have no inside information on what sort of trust structures he's got or what other financial planning he's done. But I do know he's a well-coached guy, both on and off the ice.
Okay, if you could go into any professional locker room and have the room for a moment, regardless of what sport it is, what advice are you giving these guys?
So I've actually done this. I've had the opportunity to do this. And the one thing I tell people right off the bat, because every professional athlete tends to be pretty excited about their girlfriend, the wag, whatever she may be, or he may be, whatever the case may be. Obviously, there's a lot of female professional athletes as well. You got to know the divorce statistics. And the fact of the matter is the national divorce statistics for regular people, Joe's off the street, is just under 50%. I think it's actually about 47% for first-time marriages. For professional athletes, for a lot of reasons, that number is way higher. It's closer to about 70%. And of that 70%, so you're batting about 50% higher than the general public. 50% of those divorces will come within 1 year of your retirement from your sport. And that is a stunning number. And so, a lot of these athletes have beat the odds to become pros. And a lot of them think that because they've done that, they're going to beat this statistic as well. But as you know, you can't beat statistics, and statistics are independent of one another. And so just because you beat the odds to become a pro athlete doesn't mean you're going to beat the odds of things like bankruptcy and divorce. You've got to recognize those numbers, and you've got to plan for them, because otherwise you're in to take a pretty brutal financial hit.
Okay, well, let's talk about why that percentage is so much higher and why it happens inside of that first year. I'm sure you have some ideas on why that is.
I mean, your lifestyle obviously changes quite a bit from the time you were playing to the time you retire. You know, when you're playing, you're a high income earner. You're separated from your family all throughout the season. You may be home for a few days, but then you're off for pretty long periods. And so you don't have a traditional family structure where you're sort of seeing your family every night and then leaving in the morning. That's just not how it is. And then in the off season, it tends to be very sort of perfect, right? Because you're trying to get as much as you can in during that off season. You're going on tremendous vacations. You're doing everything you can with the kids. It's just an amazing opportunity. But that's not real life, and that's not the real life that most people live. Once you retire, you go back to being, for most people, sort of a normal person living a normal life. But that's not the relationship you built while you were playing. And so for a lot of people, I think that's a really, really tough transition, whether for the athlete who may be experiencing things like depression from not being able to play anymore and missing their teammates in the locker room and really having to deal with this new lifestyle, to the spouse who now all of a sudden has got you around all the time. And that just wasn't the deal while you were playing. And I think that sort of sets the table for a situation where divorce is really prevalent.
Well, I've always made the joke about these Legends tours that a lot of these retired players go on is more so to be like the wife is going, get out, I'm not used to this, right? Rather than a whole, I miss playing hockey. It's more so to kind of keep that structure intact.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys, if you've made enough money, don't have to work. And I find that some of them, the plan is just, hey, I'm going to play golf all the time. But that plan crumbles after a while pretty quickly because you don't want to play golf all the time. And you just don't have that outlet and you don't have that passion like you did for the sport that you've played since you were 2 years old. And it's really hard mentally for guys.
Is it to some degree like the woman that you married sees you now post-retirement, all the success, all the accomplishments? That's why she wanted to be with you in the first place, because she wanted the best. She got the best, in the words of Kiss. But now that you've retired, it's like, well, that's not the man I married. But you're sitting on the couch, you're golfing, you're not in pursuit of excellence.
It's the different phases of life. You know, for us regular schmoes, that transition comes at age 65 or 70 or 75. But for these athletes, it could be at 30. And all of a sudden, you worked so hard on this one thing to reach the pinnacle, the 1% of 1% of 1% to be a pro athlete, and then it's just over. And the paychecks end. And now you've got to find that next thing at age 30. When you have focused 100% of your efforts to be a pro, that's really hard.
I've had a lot of friends who have played across numerous different sports, and they do have pension plans set up, but a lot of those don't kick in until 55, sometimes 65, and sometimes it's a partial pension, sometimes it's a full pension. When it comes to the litigation of the divorce, separation, whatever it may be, that comes into play too, I'm assuming.
It does. So you can get a divorce decree that says half of the pension eventually will come to that former spouse. So that's all on the table.
And that comes under the guise of anything that's accumulated financially during the relationship is on the table.
And in some cases, here in Canada, you've got the Family Law Act. And so you could have cohabitation rights and all sorts of other things. I mean, when we do prenuptial agreements for some of these guys and women, we've got to look at all the various jurisdictions, especially when you're talking about an NBA or NHL player, where you're talking about different states, different provinces, 2 different countries. Those are pretty impactful documents. And it's one of those things where you talk about getting lawyers involved. You got this prenup that's this thick because we've got to talk about all the different cities where you could get traded to or sign, where we've got to account for those laws. And it's brutal.
What exactly is this this Families Act that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, so if your girlfriend lives with you and you're carrying on as a family, even if you're not married, that can entitle your boyfriend, girlfriend to certain rights, including financial rights.
Is there a period of time that has to go by?
I don't think so.
It's day one, you move in, you're anywhere in Canada?
I think so. It's a federal law.
I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to preface it by saying I'm a big believer in true love. Like, I'm a believer. Like, true love lasts forever, right? Unfortunately, the side that we're showing on this show and on this episode is, maybe it doesn't, and the statistics would back that up. In saying that, these prenuptial agreements, I mean, that is like, I love you so much, sign this. In the grand scheme of things, do they really matter, the prenups? Because I've heard horror stories of them just being thrown out by a judge.
So the problem with a prenup is it is not a magic document. Prenups are contracts just like any business contract. And the problem is that there has to be a fair negotiation, meaning generally both sides should have lawyers, which doesn't often happen. Especially with pro athletes, you've got one person making a lot of money who says, I need this, and one person who says, has no money and says, well, I'll just sign whatever. And that is a fatal problem. If you've got a situation where they are about to move in together or about to get divorced or married, now you've got a situation where there may be a feeling that I have to sign this or we won't get married, and that becomes a problem for the document. But the biggest problem is that oftentimes couples will spend a lot of time negotiating this thing, get married, throw the thing in a drawer, and not think about it or engage in the terms of the agreement until they start to think about divorce. But just like any business contract, you can't just ignore all the terms of the business contract and then when you feel like you're getting stiff, sort of pull it out and say, look, you said so. It's not going to be enforceable at that point. So I think a lot of times maybe one of the best benefits of a prenup is that financial disclosure and fairness are one of the requirements of a prenup. And so couples who get prenups actually statistically are less likely to get divorced because some of the financial terms of where they each stand is sort of laid on the table. So I do think from that perspective, a prenup, regardless of the outcome otherwise, can reduce divorce rates a little bit, but it is not a magic bulletproof contract. It's got to be read. You have to understand the terms you're agreeing to and abide by those. Otherwise, it's worthless paper.
What's the terms that you're talking about? Like if you're applying it to somebody who's a professional athlete or high-level entrepreneur, what are those terms you're applying?
For example, how we're going to hold our bank accounts. Are we going to pay our bills by each paying 50%, or are we going to have a joint account? How are we going to manage all these various things? And if you don't abide by what you agreed to, then you don't have a deal at all, even if you sign that agreement.
Well, that's really tough. And the way I'm thinking is obviously we're dealing with high-profile, high-paid athletes. Why would you split bills when you're living in a $5 million mansion, right? So the onus is more so on the breadwinner.
I mean, always, right? Because that's also the person who's got the most to lose. If you don't have much, what are you risking? But the breadwinner is the one who's got to be protected and is generally the one who is asking for the prenup, right? And so they're the ones who have to be careful in making sure that the document is properly negotiated, properly enforced during the marriage, if you want any chance for that thing to be enforced after the marriage.
A lot of times then when people sign these, the advice from most law firms is, hey, we're going to sign this. Hopefully you never have to look at it again. We're just going to tuck it away over here. So the advice almost kind of is, it's signed, don't worry about it. We're going to put it away. But you're saying that's not the case.
It's a bad idea. You've got to really understand what you're signing. It's not one of these things you can kind of dole off to the lawyers and say, have my people talk to your people, tell me where to sign. It's not going to work. You have to understand the terms that you're agreeing to and then live by them. And it's a fair point. If you're a busy person who's working out and trying to just stay on the team, you've got to keep this in the back of your mind, just like everything else, to make sure that those terms are being abided by. And if it's not you, you better have someone helping you through that.
In the whole realm of, again, professional athletes having that date of like, hey, my career's over, then the earning kind of goes down. Can you specify anything in particular? Because I'll be honest with you, I know fidelity isn't exactly a strong model for professional athletes. There's been a lot of rumors and speculation what we know about the whole thing. And I'm not saying it's every athlete, but how much does that play into it?
In terms of the quality of investments?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Everybody wants to work with athletes, right? It's sexy. You like to market it. You can sell it. And so you get a lot of people who probably aren't qualified to be doing it. On the flip side, you've got the athletes who are really busy, who are generally getting financial and legal advice from the person in the stall next to them who may not be any more qualified than they are to be giving the advice.
Yeah, usually it's like, hey, have you heard about Bitcoin?
Yeah, or hey, I'm investing in this restaurant. It sounds great. You should get in on this too. Or retired guys who then go into the financial services and, just because they were great at, slinging pucks or hitting balls, it doesn't make them great financial advisors, but that's a common thing because of the network that they've got. So it's attractive to the financial service industry people. But you got to be careful. You've got to do your research. There's so many traps for the unwary. Just because it's a big name or even someone you recognize or big financial institution, these are all ripe for abuse if you're not careful. And at the end of the day, you as the athlete are ultimately responsible for yourself, right? no one is going to care about you more than yourself, not your lawyer, not even your parents, not your girlfriend, spouse, whatever. You've got to be responsible for yourself. And even though you're really busy, at the end of the day, you've got to prioritize certain things or else the risk of abuse is there.
Well, you mentioned how predatory it can be. And what I've pointed out on the show before, and I've used Jonathan Toews as an example, and I'll use it again because I know you're a big Blackhawks fan and he's from right here in Winnipeg, is we saw him doing a lot of charitable work, a lot of Canadian Tire stuff. And more often than not, from the advice of the accountant, it's like, listen, unless you're going out and doing charitable stuff, you're going to lose that to taxes. So it seems like a catch-22. Don't invest, but at the same time, you got to do this kind of stuff. And those lines can get blurred, I'm assuming.
You've got to be really careful, but again, with good financial advice, and I'm not a financial advisor, I'm not an insurance agent, I don't do any of that. I'm an attorney who does asset protection and estate planning, but you have an opportunity to set up things like trusts and asset protection vehicles.
Can you explain what a trust is? Not to interrupt,
Sure.
but a lot of people hear trust and they don't really understand what that means.
Sure. There's a lot of different kinds of trusts, but essentially a trust is an entity like a corporation that you can have certain controls over. Certainly you can set it up and you can put assets into that thing. And depending on the level of control that you've got, it can be a separate entity from you. And so it can benefit generally family, children, things like that. Certain things are assignable, certain things aren't. So for example, you can't assign your income. And so the money I'm making as a professional athlete, I can't just put in the trust. But for example, my marketing rights can be assigned. And so anything I'm making by way of marketing can be assigned to a trust. Now all of a sudden the money's going into the trust, not my personal accounts. And that can be not only accounting segregated, but asset protected away from the rest of my assets. And then it benefits my family, could be forever.
But still taxable.
It's taxable. The government's going to get their money. Sometimes the trust is directly taxed. Sometimes the taxes come out to me, which sometimes has significant benefits. Sometimes it goes down to the beneficiaries that I name. The government's always going to get their money, but there's ways to structure it so that the assets in the trust are pretty tax efficient.
How many, if you can give me a ballpark idea, how many of these athletes are actually looking at that kind of stuff?
A tiny, tiny number. Way fewer than probably should.
Percentage-wise?
5 to 10%.
Really?
Do you feel it would be beneficial for leagues to set up, and I know some of them do, where they say, hey, we have a guy if you're interested. It's not forcible, but we have a guy.
So all the leagues do some financial literacy work. Some is better than others. I've seen some of the materials. Some of it is too basic. Some of it is too complicated. It's a matter of how much is actually getting absorbed, and then who are the purveyors of what's getting done, right? There's a lot of people, for example, in the NFL who are agents who are happy to say, I'm an NFL certified agent. And there's a lot of people who are happy to say, that is all nonsense. I am happy to tell you I'm not a certified agent. And so if you're a player, how do you know whether you want to be on the left bank or the right bank? It is really hard. And again, at the end of the day, you've got to do your research and make good decisions.
One thing that pops into my mind is the structure that you have down in the U.S. with the NCAA, where they've been very transparent. I mean, most of these guys are taking basket weaving 101 or TV repaired in order to get their credits to be able to play. Would it not be more beneficial if you're basically going to university to learn how to be a professional athlete? Why wouldn't we teach you all the things that go along with that?
Even in law school, they don't do that, right? So law schools are very big in telling you how much money they project you making when you're going to graduate law school. Everybody publishes those numbers. You know, as someone applying to these schools, you know what the numbers are. A lot of people make decisions based on that, and there is zero financial literacy taught. They don't teach you anything about sort of the business of law, and these are lawyers and law schools. And so what opportunity is some forward on some Division I program or a wide receiver at a Division I what chance do they have with that stuff?
Well, my thought is, I mean, not every one of those NCAA athletes are going to turn pro, but guess what? There might be an opportunity for you to work in that industry as A, B, or C with the things that we've taught you over these past 4 years. It seems too simple, and I don't understand why they're not doing it.
It's a minor league for a lot of these pro leagues. And they are focused on getting as much out of these guys and building up alumni networks and trying to advance them as much as they possibly can. And these are just have never been important priorities for any of these programs. A lot of times they do bring in former retired professional athletes to talk to them. But what I hear a lot now is the retired athletes will come in and talk about the business of pro sports. And then this just happened to me recently. And one of the stars of the team will pull them aside and say, hey, I need to talk to you about finances, right? And what they'll talk about is not making money or the contract they're going to sign. It's the NIL money that they took and the giant tax bill that they now have that they don't know how to get out of. And that is a gigantic problem.
Without naming names, I'm sure you have a few anecdotes that you can share on that.
You're loving the episodes and the interviews so far.
I am.
One of the downsides of doing an independent show where no questions, no stones are unturned is sponsorships. And if you want to help us keep the lights on to keep more interviews like this coming, you can sign up to be a YouTube channels member or a Patreon member. It's $5. You get every single interview we have in this series, Patreon perks, exclusive merch, free merch, and more. And the whole list of interviews, you can wait throughout the entire summer or get them all now. And the list goes Chris Mason, Matt Murray, Jamie McLennan, Dale Weiss, Jamie Phillips, Jordan Schmaltz, Matt Hackett, best-selling author Rich Cooper, professional divorce lawyer for professional athletes Eido Walny, Brent Sopel, Bill Ranford, Navy SEAL TC Cummings, my friend Matt Murray, my former teammates Justin Schmidt, Trevor Babin, and more. $5, you get every single episode, perks, and more. What are you waiting for?
And Trav's mom's phone number. So $5 well spent.
You got to sign up for the top tier for that. Is that, I got the money, I didn't know I had to pay taxes, I thought it was free, I spent it, I don't have that $200,000, whatever, and can you help me now?
There's almost nothing you can do at that point because you can't declare bankruptcy. Taxes are not, they don't go away in bankruptcy. You are someone who's going to be saddled with that tax bill until you work out some deal with the IRS or the other taxing agencies.
Would you mind sharing a few anecdotes where you've seen it? And the only reason why is I know there's a lot of young athletes out there right now, and thank God both of your kids have you to kind of lean on for this kind of stuff, and that's very rare to have. But have you seen it not only in your age group, but I mean even some of these younger kids as well?
It's happening with a lot of athletes, right? And this whole NIL concept is still relatively new and getting worked out. And there are a lot of problems that still need to get worked out. The way the universities allocate the money, the way athletes are receiving it, and it's not necessarily millions and millions of dollars like some football players are getting. A lot of times it's smaller amounts of money, and athletes are just happy to get it. They're happy to pay for dinner for their friends. They're happy to go buy a PlayStation or whatever the new gaming system happens to be. And the money gets spent. And then the tax bill comes later. And that was, they've never had a real job. They've never gotten W-2s or any tax forms. And all of a sudden this thing shows up in the mail and you freak out. No one told me I had to put aside 40% of the money that I was receiving because the government's going to want their share. And there's nothing you can do to make that go away. It's terrifying.
It seems predatory. It seems almost as if we know this is going to happen. And in the grand scheme of things, you're ruining a life financially.
And then the question that gets begged is, whose responsibility is that? Is it the schools? It's not their money. They're sort of doling it all out, but they're helping their athletes. Is it the parents? I mean, they may not even know how much money is coming in. Again, at the end of the day, it's the athlete's responsibility. But now, unlike a pro, you're talking about an 18, 19, 20-year-old. You're still an adult, though, and that's got to fall on your shoulders. But 100%, there's got to be way better financial literacy. That is not non-existent, but almost non-existent.
But to what degree, though, do you want to empower the athletes to have a little bit of knowledge with that, but not too much, because we don't want you thinking outside the box and thinking you're better than us and that you don't need us anymore. Like, we need you to need us because you're our asset. Is there some truth in that?
100%. I mean, it's one hand washing the other constantly. I mean, you've been a pro. You've seen this at certain levels. There's always hangers on. There's always somebody trying to get in your pockets for something. There's always someone trying to sell you something, and it's a tough lifestyle. Everybody sort of puts athletes up on a pedestal and looks at them as heroes. But from the vantage point that I have, I can tell you it is a rough life. You've got to be really careful all the time. Trust has got to be a really difficult thing to earn. There's stories of people who've even had financial difficulties with their own parents.
Jack Johnson, when his parents.
Jack Johnson is the example that always comes to mind because he was a Blackhawk. I know all about that story. It's brutal.
Well, let's recap it a little bit, because from what I understand, his parents were his acting managers, were they not?
They were his managers. They were his agents. Again, I don't have any insider information. I've just read about the story. But it's one of those things where I've had other clients tell me I don't trust anyone, but I do trust my parents. So I've made them power of attorney. And Jack Johnson's the story that I tell them, like, listen, I'm sure Jack's dad or mom took him to the rink all the time, but look what happened. Sometimes there's this mentality of, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me. If it wasn't for me waking up at 4:00 in the morning to take you to the rink all the time. And so you owe me for that, right? And it's a tough mentality.
Did they just like spend like goons or not invest, or they took them to the cleaners kind of deal?
I think it was a combination of both. Just loans that weren't repaid, advances for certain things, investments that didn't work out. But I mean, he was basically pushed to bankruptcy.
I mean, at least he figured it out halfway through his career and had a little bit to kind of recoup. If you're at the end of your career and you find that out, like a Brian Berard, you're in real trouble.
It's brutal. It's a brutal world.
When you talk about predators too, like you had a really good article that I was reading before you came down, but that these athletes are being predatorized. Is that the word? God,
preyed on.
Preyed on. Thank you. Taking too many pucks off the head. But they're being preyed on from anything from like a small car accident to people wanting to get into their finances, and short of it being Bitcoin, every investment you're going to make sucks. For like, I got this restaurant, I got this book club. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, again, you've got to know that everyone knows who you are, right? Your face is a public one. And, in the NBA, it's hard to hide when you're 7 feet tall. And so you've got to just be really careful in terms of who you trust, sort of releasing trust in very small segments, doing your research, not necessarily taking advice from the person whose stall is right next to you, or even your coaches who may not know any better, and just being super, super careful.
So you'd advise little, for lack of a better term, little shit test along the way to see, okay, you pass this one on the next one and kind of going.
You got to make people earn your trust. I mean, you are you must assume that you are a target for everyone around you until you can, for yourself, determine that that person is someone I can trust. I tell people all the time, I mean, there's not even pictures of the people that I work with in my office. You would have no idea who I work with unless I told you, and I will never tell you. I've gone into people's offices where it's lined with, all these pictures of the attorney or the financial advisor with their arm around someone. Some people market that. I think that confidentiality and privacy is of utmost concern. That's just my priority. And if that's something that's important to people, I know I'm not alone. If that's important to you as the athlete, then look for that. If you think that you want to be with someone who's got your picture plastered everywhere, then look for that. But you've got to be the one making that determination.
Love him or hate him, Piers Morgan. He did an interview with Cristiano Ronaldo, I think about a year ago. And one of the really great pieces of that was he was asking basically about this. You're being preyed upon by a lot of people. You're in the media. You're one of the most famous men in the world. How many people do you actually trust? And he had a really cool, dramatic 4 or 5 second pause, and he says, 4 people. That's it. Obviously, Piers isn't one of them, but isn't that insane that a guy that successful has 4 people that he trusts?
It's amazing that it's 4. You would think that it would be less than that, because at the end of the day, again, people evolve, people change. Just because you trust them, I mean, think of your friends growing up, right? Some of them turned out to be great, lifelong friends. Others sort of fell away. Others made bad decisions in their lives. But you've got to understand that their bad decisions will reflect on you as a public figure. Their decisions to the things that you're doing could affect you financially. If you're investing in them or relying on them for financial advice, that could go sideways. You've just, I think, always got to be questioning people and trust as few people as you possibly can. Even your own agent, right? They've got their own financial stake in your success, and that person's close to you to the point where you're talking to them all the time. You've got to remember that person. I hear stories all the time of people retiring and then never hearing from their agent again. And that was the person you relied on your whole career. That's brutal.
There's a title, and I'm going to be careful with this one because I know that you have a bunch of different hats that you wear, but the word consultant to me has been more and more popular over the past 20, 30 years. And from what I've learned over that period of time is that what consultant does is it removes the blame for anything that's going to go wrong. It's not, I'm not your accountant. I'm not your agent. I'm not any of these other things where I could be implicit if anything goes down. I'm just a guy that gives you advice. And I think a lot of times that gets confused with a trusted source.
Listen, when I graduated undergraduate from college, half of my friends became consultants. They knew about as much about the world as my 16-year-old daughter. just a title you wear that now all of a sudden, the free advice where you're, sort of just chatting around the table and giving your opinions for free. Now, when I pay you for it, you go from being my buddy to being my consultant. That's the difference.
If you had to predict, like with Ronaldo, to go back to him for a second, when he says he has 4 people he trusts, who do you think those 4 would be if you had to take a wild guess?
Georgina
is I think are they married now?
No.
Didn't they split? No, it was the Russian, Ivana Shenko.
Yeah, he has kids with, and he has kids with Georgina as well. But from what I understand, I found this one fascinating, that when he went over to play in the Saudi League, you're not allowed to live together unless you're married, unless you're Cristiano Ronaldo.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you think Georgina...
I know that she's got to be one of them. I presume that whoever his agent is probably that person, especially considering the ridiculous numbers he signed to be in the Saudi League. Probably his mom, because I know that they're very close. And then who knows, maybe his friend from when he was growing up. But I know he's very, very close with his mom. I presume his girlfriend, and then two other ex people in his life.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, when you bring up names like Ronaldo, Messi, Gretzky, Lemieux, Crosby, take your pick. Are there some names and some talent that are just too big to fail, where they're not at risk of any of these horror stories that we've talked about?
No one's too big to fail. This is not General Motors where the government's going to step in and save you. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. When you look at Walter Payton's been divorced. Michael Jordan's been divorced.
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady's been divorced. And had he married Bridget Moynihan, they would have gotten divorced. It's brutal. No one is too big to fail.
Is it accurate? I saw a quote a while ago, but it was like, smart men don't marry. Is there some truth behind that?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, I think to Dave's point, I mean, there is love. Love evolves, right? Love is not not to get poetic here, but love is not something that you see on a movie. I mean, love evolves. Your relationship over time evolves. It is not this passionate, want to jump on each other every time you come from home sort of thing. It is a mature relationship between two people. And I think Wayne Gretzky's been married for forever, and he's a good example of a superstar making it work. But for every Wayne Gretzky, there's a Michael Jordan. I believe it. I mean, I've been married a really long time. Has it been a fairy tale the whole time? No, but we work out our issues, and I love my wife a lot, and we're going to be married, I hope, a really long time.
When it comes to relationships, it's interesting now that we're in the day and age of social media, where it would seem on the surface, and I'm not saying this is a blanket statement. I want to be very careful because we have caught a little bit of heat on some of our social clips, but when it comes to some of these professional athletes and their relationships, we as consumers like to see this behind the scenes, going into the life of what it looks like to live in these gigantic mansions and this lifestyle that we have. But I kind of feel like it's almost a detriment to the relationship or the player themselves. Am I close on that?
It's actually, from my perspective, a terrible situation. There's been a rash of burglaries amongst professional athletes. And when you've got someone with a camera posting onto TikTok, them sort of walking through your house, whether it's from the front door to the living room or down to the basement or wherever, there's lots of people looking at that. And some people are just voyeurs who want to see what you're up to and what your house looks like. But all it takes is one smart criminal to sort of map out your house and then know that you're off playing in Calgary tonight, to know that in 5 minutes I can get from the front door, follow this roadmap you just gave me, get to the vault where you just showed me all the jewelry is kept, and book out the door.
So you're saying there's a difference between Architectural Digest and TikTok?
Pretty big difference.
Yeah.
Did you see the Amazon Prime series where they followed Quinn Hughes around, and they showed this one shot? And being in Vancouver, I know exactly the area, but he opens the windows and it shows BC Place and then the Falls Creek skyline. And if you're in Vancouver, you know exactly where he lives. You know the apartment building. To some degree, you being the law attorney, are you not stepping in and saying, okay, we have to cut that. You can't be showing where the players live because, like you mentioned, it's a couple seconds away from somebody busts in, the Canucks are playing, he's playing on the ice.
From my perspective, I don't like that, but I don't know if that building's got 24/7, manned personnel, security, what the security system is. I mean, I knew where Jonathan Toews lived in Chicago, and it'd be pretty hard for someone to find that house if you didn't know exactly where it was. I just happened to be friends with one of his neighbors and so I sort of knew. But it's not on the map. He did a pretty good job of covering his tracks. But you've got to be super careful. I mean, real estate records are public. Someone who wants to find you and can dig will dig. And so you've just got to take the steps to try to be secure and cover your tracks as much as possible. And once the record's out there, it's out there. You can't make it go away.
Just this past year, we had Joe Burrow, we had Patrick Mahomes, we had Travis Kelce, we had Evgeny Malkin. I mean, the number just seems to be getting bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these burglaries are not being made public because the athletes don't want them to be public. The numbers are astronomical.
Even
it
higher.
Happens a lot.
Wow.
Happens a lot. A lot.
Do you have any stats on that?
I don't have the stats, but it's a lot. It's a stunning number.
Like dozens, hundreds? Like
It's
if you took
definitely dozens.
You took the NHL, about 900, 1,000 players in the whole league. If you had to guess how many a year get burglarized? 5, 10, 20?
I'm just guessing, but it's certainly more than 5 or 10.
Wow.
Somebody comes into your office and says, I just signed a big contract. Here's the team I'm playing for. I don't know what I'm doing. Do you prefer a guy like that that's willing to admit his lack of knowledge on this, or somebody that comes in going, all right, here's what I want to do. I want this going here, there, and there?
The next time someone comes in and says, I want to do this, that, and the other, will be the first time that happens.
Okay.
So,
Are you looking forward to that day?
I mean, that would be amazing. But I'm not holding my breath for it. I mean, what you really want is someone essentially admitting, listen, I know I have a problem. I don't know the solutions to these problems. I found you somehow. Please help me. And then for me, a lot of it is educational, right? So we may have 1,000 different solutions, and some of them are really complicated. But you've got to understand that this athlete and maybe their spouse have limited time and patience to understand all the various tools that I have available to me, right? This is not a CEO of a company who can just have someone sort of run the company for a while he and I or he and she talk for a while and sort of get this all together. There's a limited amount of time, limited amount of patience, sort of eyes glaze over fairly quickly. And so you've got to understand that and then sort of incrementally start to put things in where it's digestible to the athlete. Because if they're not going to follow, again, sort of like the prenup, if they're not going to follow the terms of what we're setting up, say with a trust or other vehicle, you're wasting your time and money. And so we've got to put stuff in incrementally so that they can digest it, understand how it fits into their financial picture. If there are other financial service professionals, financial advisor, insurance agent, accountant, whatever, they've also got to be on board. And so that stuff takes time and effort.
This one's a little bit of more of a wild one, and I know we haven't talked about it on the full show yet, but I've mentioned with NHL players, NHL wives, hockey wives, kind of spinning off their own brand from their husbands or their boyfriends or whatever. So, like, for example, Gabe Vilardi for the Jets, his missus does a whole thing where she's documenting her Pilates and coffee routines and whatnot, and then Sandberg as well, his wife as well, doing the same thing. I have a theory. In the next 3 to 5 years, one of them at some point is going to post something, because it's all public, obviously, and whether it's like a behind the scenes in the house or maybe that hidden Trump poster in the background, something, and knowing how scummy the mainstream media is with how many spin jobs they did on the interview with Matt from last summer, they're going to find something, they're going to run with it, and that guy's going to get his contract terminated or something's going to get big in the media. Do you think that that's a realistic possibility?
For sure. And listen, we live in a society where celebrity is a profession. And so, if you're someone who was an unknown and the only reason you're known is because of who you are married to or who you're dating, that's ripe for problems, financial problems, celebrity problems. And so I certainly think that's a possibility.
Well, I find it fascinating because we've had literally the situation on this podcast where we've had a current NHL player under current contract with a team and have the rug pulled out from underneath us right before the interview happens. It's happened a few times. Mm-hmm. And whenever we reach out to the team says, we only allow players to do podcasts that are inside of the network, whether it be Sportsnet, TSN, ESPN, like the ones that the NHL deals with. So I'm curious, at what point is the league, any league, going to step in and say, your significant other can't have that social media page?
I mean, it's hard because what relationship does that spouse have with the league? So now you've got to run it through the athlete and just say, we have a contractual relationship, and so I don't want you to do things, right? You can have all these things sort of put into your player contract. But what is the contractual relationship with the league or the team and that spouse? Unless he or she is also signing a contract, and now you've probably got some financial remuneration that's got to come to them. It gets pretty complicated.
Well, it gets complicated, but if it's deterrent to the team or to the player or to the image that they've created, is there not a case there?
Potentially. But again, I think that all sort of runs through the athlete, and you've got to rely on them to say, hey, we'd really appreciate if this person not do that. Could you have a word with them? I don't know if you could enforce them to not do it. You tell them to stop.
Well, the NFL has the Kelsey brothers doing a very successful New Heights podcast right now, which is killing it. And I'm curious to know is that open to any player if they want to start doing a podcast?
I have no idea.
Me neither.
But would you not have to address the fact that if you're, let's say, like a Connor Hellebuck, you can get away with a significantly more than a Joel Holfer, who's the backup for the St. Louis Blues. Hellebuck can basically say, okay, I'm going to do this. I know I'm not supposed to, but I can, but the average guy can't. So I think we have to factor that in too, no?
There's certainly, rules for superstars and rules for everybody else. It's why Patrick Mahomes seems to have rules for himself on the field. I mean, that's just the reality, right? At the end of the day, sports at the pro level is a product, right? You're selling this thing. It's competition and all of that, right? Just back to the ancient Olympics, but it is way more than that. It is a business and it is a brand, and there's a lot of money in play. And if you lose sight of that, you are losing sight of the whole picture.
Well, what do we consider them? Do we consider them employees or independent contractors?
They're employees. For sure, they're employees.
Getting taxed like employees, 56%.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, they're employees because they're employed by the team.
Is that accurate, though? Like, for those that don't know, like when an NHL player, whoever's making from $1 million upwards, you're getting taxed at 56% plus?
It can be more than that. So you get taxed based on the jurisdiction that you're playing in. And so, for example, if your home team is in California, you're playing for, say, the Ducks, half of your home games are getting taxed at California's rates, in addition to federal. But every jurisdiction that you play games in, that's where you get taxed. Oh. And so these guys their tax return, you think your tax returns are complicated. Professional athletes' tax returns are incredibly complicated. And generally, they're specialists doing the work because they've got, if you're playing in the NHL, you're filing tax returns in Missouri, Illinois, New York, California. Everywhere you play, you're filing tax returns.
So based on the schedule, so if you're in St. Louis for 6, you have 6 games there, you have 6 in California. That's crazy.
Well,
I didn't know that.
I'm not going to be the first one to say that I understand all of the financial aspects of professional sports and whatnot, but wasn't escrow supposed to solve all that so we didn't have the situation where a player says, I'd rather play for the Dallas Stars because they have 0 income tax in Texas rather than playing in California?
I mean, that's part of it. It's also why even the Canadian teams get paid in U.S. dollars to try to equalize all of that. But, it's just one of those things where nothing is ever perfect and nothing is ever equal. And so there's always going to be someone trying to game the system. Who's the new Dodger who just got Ohtani,
yeah,
who got a crazy, back end contract where he's trying to evade a lot of California taxes. I personally thought that wasn't going to work, but I think the general consensus now is that it works.
Well, it kind of sounds similar to what.
Can I ask what did he do? I'm not familiar. I have no idea about that.
So he signed a long-term deal with a very low salary during his playing days, and it's extremely heavily loaded on the back end where he is going to be retired. And the theory is that when he retires, he can move to a lower taxing jurisdiction or a 0 taxing jurisdiction, and would sort of elude, not evade, because that would be illegal, elude all of the taxes that would be on those dollars had he been earning them during his playing days in California.
Well, David Beckham had a similar situation with the LA Galaxy when he first came over and played in the MLS, where his salary was small, but they said, well, we'll guarantee you at least $100 million in marketing and endorsement.
And maybe those marketing and endorsement deals were assigned to a trust. Who knows? Beckham's situation is further complicated by the fact that he is a UK citizen, and so he's got to deal with a pretty difficult tax situation back home. I mean, again, it gets complicated.
So is that one of those things where he's playing for the Dodgers, where they have the worst taxes probably than anywhere in the league, but it's low money, and then when he leaves or he retires, he's going to a South Dakota or a Florida, And then, okay.
He's going to earn a lot more of that money.
Mario Lemieux, if I remember correctly, ran into a situation where he was owed a lot of money by the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he basically said, I'll take ownership shares because you guys can't pay me. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ways around it, but man, I couldn't even imagine being the bean counter and having to figure all that out.
How would that work tax-wise if you're getting paid in shares of the team as opposed to, is that like Elon where he takes like $0 but he just gets paid tax-free in shares?
That's basically what he's worth rather than what he has, right? I would assume.
It depends what was compensation. So regardless of whether you get paid in bananas or cash, if it's compensation, the value of that is going to get taxed. And so it's a matter of, what was a distribution, what was a settlement of a debt, because that's taxed differently, what was salary. I mean, I'm no accountant and there's a reason why, but that all comes down to it. What was salary and what wasn't.
So if you're advising a player, let's just take hockey for example, you would probably tell them to avoid playing in Canada based off the taxes, or where would you advise them to go play?
I mean, listen, if you're a professional athlete, you're happy to play anywhere, right? And so sometimes some guys have the luxury of picking, some guys don't. And so I would never tell someone to not sign somewhere because you could be out on the street, maybe they get tired of waiting for you and now you're out on the street. So for me, not that anyone would ever consult with me because that's not my role, but man, that seems really risky to.
Can I pick your brain a little bit being a Wisconsin resident?
Sure.
There's been a lot of talk about the NHL expanding. We've heard teams like Kansas City possibly getting a team, Utah just stealing from Phoenix, and Phoenix getting another team back. The Milwaukee Admirals have had a long history, and they've done really, really well in the American League. That new arena that the Bucks just got, it looks like it's prime for hockey. A, why aren't you guys in the conversation, and are you ready for an NHL team?
So I'll tell you an interesting story about Milwaukee hockey. So the Bradley Center, which is where the Admirals played before they moved to their new arena, was actually built for hockey. It's where the Bucks played, but it was built for hockey. It had an ice sheet with the basketball court on top of it. And the first game that was supposed to be played there featured Wayne Gretzky right before he got traded to LA.
Wow.
And so that game never happened. And I actually think that turned the course of hockey in Milwaukee. There's a little bit of a territorial issue with the Blackhawks because Milwaukee is a quick drive from Chicago. I know there are a lot of Blackhawks fans in Milwaukee simply because they're so close. But the Admirals, Harris Turer, as the owner of that team, has done a tremendous job with marketing and putting them in a right-sized arena. Harris is a great guy. I would love pro hockey to come to Milwaukee. I worry about it being a small market and staying competitive. Again, Trav, to your point about guys picking places they want to go, if you've got the opportunity to go to Chicago with all the nightlife and restaurants, or you're looking at a place like Milwaukee, which is great, my hometown now, but doesn't have all that, it's tough to recruit.
Yeah, but at the same time, from what I hear, most of the guys that play for the Packers are living in Chicago. Most of the guys that are playing for New Jersey are living in New York. We're not saying where you have to live, but this is where you're going to play.
Listen, I think the Admirals do a great job. There's a great relationship between Nashville and Milwaukee because the Admirals are the AAA affiliate for Nashville, but on the baseball side, the Milwaukee Brewers have their AAA affiliate in Nashville, and I know there's a lot of cross-pollination with the ownership groups. It's a great situation that they've got. Personally, when the Blackhawks come to town, and every year for the last couple of years, they've played a hockey game at the Fiserv Forum. It's been amazing. The atmosphere is electric. They've packed the place. Selfishly, I'd love it.
Well, wasn't that the big worry about moving a team to St. Louis? Was that it was going to pull away from Chicago?
St. Louis is 7 hours away. Milwaukee is 45 minutes away.
Right.
So the calculus, I think, is dramatically different.
Can I be the bad news bears and kind of bring the mood down just a little bit? I'm curious with the Trevor Bauer situation, as somebody who's advising biggest contract in MLB history at the time of when he did sign.
Talk about a guy who's been preyed on.
Yeah. So, what would you do with that situation if you could sit Trevor Bauer down right here and go start to finish? This is what I would have done. This is what I think you should do. And then also the lost wages of you had X amount of dollars. She slandered your name. You lost it all. It's been debunked. She lied. She was full of shit. Sorry, I shouldn't have sworn. But what do you do now? Where would you start with that?
Things after the fact are always very difficult, right? So the conversation is different from where you start to pick up the pieces from if you could roll time back, which none of us can do. Obviously, had there been conversations on the front end, it's the same sorts of things we've been talking about over the course of this talk. Make smart decisions, trust no one, be really careful with who you're parking your head on a pillow with. Because there's a lot of traps. There's a lot of people.
That's really tough to do for 18 to 30-year-olds or 35-year-olds. Men in general, man, that's tough. That's a tough lesson to teach.
It's the toughest.
Well, especially for dudes, like we love beautiful women. That's the currency. And when you're making 120 sheets and you're the top pitcher in the world and you have access to all these beautiful women, how are you going to say no to all these beautiful women knocking at your door? Like, what would you advise him on that?
You just got to be careful. I mean, you've got to think with the right head. And if you're thinking with the wrong head, you're in big trouble. And he for other people, he's the guy you can point to now, right? And say, listen, you might be on the top of the world, you might have signed the biggest contract, but as we said, no one's too big to fail. And that is example A1 of someone who made maybe not the best choices and literally cost him his career.
Chris Rock said it best, where he said, men can stop chasing, but it's really hard to say no when you're being chased. And when you're being chased that much, that's tough.
And when you're a pro athlete, everyone's chasing you.
Yeah.
Financial advisors, consultants, really pretty men and women. It's a tough lifestyle. And you can either fall into the trap of feeling like you're immune to it all until people start chipping away at your armor. And again, now it's too late. Or you can understand the situation that you're in and understand that celebrity is a really weird thing that you may not have been properly prepped for and take the steps in advance to try to insulate yourself. And there's a lot of things that can be done. Or you're going to fall into the same traps as everybody else. And I think it's tough for athletes who, their whole life have been told the odds of you making it are zero, right? You'll never make it. I don't care how good you are. The odds are so much against you. And they've made it, right? They beat those odds. But statistics are not dependent on one another. They're all independent. And just because you beat those odds don't mean you're going to beat other odds. And you've got to understand that. It doesn't mean because you made it here, you're going to beat the divorce odds. You're going to beat the bankruptcy odds. You're going to beat all these other things because you're not.
To use the Bauer analogy, though, like if you're advising him, like what type of steps would you take to protect him? Might take around a couple dates first.
Well, never mind that. What do you do now, I think, is the question. I think like after all of this, what's the next big step? Because like we said, I don't think you can really coach that saying, well, let me pick the girl for you, right?
But you could use him as an example of like, this is how we, like, give me a credit check. Let's see, make sure she got some money. She's not.
Well, Mr. Beast even said, he goes, when he's met a lot of women, but they have to check all of these boxes. And he had 10 boxes that had to be checked. And that's when he started dating the most recent girl. And I think that's, I don't know if that's just experience or what it is, but there's a guy who said, no, before I even think about it, they have to check these boxes.
What are the boxes, by the way?
He never said.
Oh.
I have a friend who's a celebrity who, I won't mention his name. He had a contract he had people sign. Almost like a confidentiality mini prenup just to date him because he was smart enough he was a pretty smart guy. And he knew that there was exposure. And notwithstanding that, he had people sue him for things.
Didn't Chappelle do a bit about an NDA before any emotional reckoning was going to happen?
It's almost funny, but it's the life that it's at least the mentality that you've got to be in. Again, trust no one. Make people earn your trust. It's not like normal people where I sort of trust you until I don't. It's got to be the reverse of that, where I don't trust you until I do.
What a world. That kind of goes against the whole,
Sucks.
Well, it's the whole basis of what your country was built on, which is innocent until proven guilty. And now you got to treat everyone as guilty before you can say, all right, you're okay.
But if the law is not in your favor, then you got to take it back in your own hands and say, okay, well, how can I protect myself, right? And then on the topic you just mentioned, I remember hearing from a reliable source that Drake and Bieber both, if you want to date, you want to even go for a coffee, you're signing this NDA, that's it.
But again, even an NDA is only as good as the paper it's written on, right? So if I sign an NDA and I disclose something, I can't unring that bell. The information's out. So maybe there are financial consequences, but if I'm some schmo without a lot of dollars, sort of going back to the question you posed with Trevor Bauer, what does he do? Can he sue this woman? What assets does she have? Maybe he gets a victory in court, but what that gets him is a piece of paper saying that this person owes him millions of dollars when she's got 2 nickels to rub together.
Well, coming from a guy who went through a very lengthy lawsuit, more often than not, they ain't worth it. Like, they're really not, man. They're hard on the family. They're hard on your psyche. They're hard on your sleep at night. They suck. They absolutely suck.
So what does Bauer do then? Because he had the tweet the other day, I'll play for $0 with just incentives. I want to pitch. I'm the smartest, best pitcher on the planet. Nobody will sign me. What do you do?
The fact that he is doing that tells you everything you need to know, right? The only thing you can do is pick yourself up by the bootstraps and try to rebuild. But again, Jack Johnson had time on his career. Bauer's sort of towards the end of his career. I think teams are going to look at someone like that saying, listen, even if you're good, do I want the baggage that comes along with you? And the answer is probably no, because maybe the difference between him and the person with the clean record is so infinitesimally small that they're better off with the other guy. And that sucks for Bauer.
Yeah.
Well, that's happened a lot of times. I mean, we've talked about it on this show where we talked about it earlier about contracts and when it comes to your pension. All these leagues have a very close eye on a lot of these players who are approaching that, they're about to hit their full pension. We'd rather go with the guy who's fresh into the league who we can pay a lot less and take a chance on him rather than the guy who's served out the last 5, 6, 7 years. Let's let him go. It's ruthless, man. It sucks.
It's a business. And fans tend to think of it as these are my guys, this is my team. It's a business. And the people owning those teams are making money off of that. They're making money off of the product on the field or the ice, which is the players. They're making money off of the marketing and licensing, and they're trying to instill this sort of fan devotion for a purpose, right? It's not so that you love the team. It's that you pay ridiculous sums for the hats and the jerseys, and then we trade your favorite player, and now you got to buy a new jersey because that guy's not one of us anymore. The people playing don't look at it that way, right? It's their profession. They don't look at the teams as a team that you've grown up with. Just because you grew up in Winnipeg doesn't mean you'd only play for the Jets. You'll play for whoever the heck is going to pay you.
Right.
There isn't this sort of misplaced loyalty because it's a business. But they also need to understand the other side of the business, right? For every buyer, there's a seller. For every employee, there's an employer. And you cannot lose sight of that.
And to some degree, you can't have winners or you don't have losers.
There's always winners and losers.
Is that an accurate statement with that?
There's always winners and losers, right? Everybody's trying to be the winner, but for every winner, there's a loser. Who knows what is your worth as a player? It's whatever someone's willing to pay you. And unfortunately, unlike a lot of other professions where you may have, infinite opportunities, if you don't like this employer, you can go somewhere else. If you're a professional athlete and you want to play at the highest levels, the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, there's only a handful of teams who you can sign with. And if no one wants to sign you, now you're looking at a sort of lesser league. Not to say that they're bad leagues. There's a lot of great leagues around the world. The KHL has their certain high points, but it's not the NHL.
I thought about this as we were chatting, and because I know you wear a lot of hats and you're obviously a very intelligent guy, I was going to challenge you by saying you need to come up with a syllabus for a one-year program for the Badgers, like the entire program with the Wisconsin Badgers, that you have to take this course. Because I know a lot of universities, when it comes to student athletes, they have to take time management classes. It's a prerequisite. You have to take it your first year. I'm surprised, instead of you doing that, I'm surprised that player associations, which thank God Ted Lindsay was smart enough to unionize the NHL back in the day to make sure that players were protected for the most part. Why aren't PAs putting more pressure on these collegiate programs to say they need to be better educated before they come into our union?
I mean, I'd love to see that. I think leagues like the NHL that have developed minor leagues, I think there's a lot of opportunity to develop financial literacy there. By the time you're signing your big contract with whoever, the Blackhawks, the Rangers, whatever, the world is happening at 1,000 miles an hour at that point. But when you're in the ECHL, when you're in the AHL, life is a little bit slower. You're not the crazy celebrity that you are now. Even if you're not a star, people know who you are. But you can walk around town in the AHL. You can walk around town in the ECHL. I think those teams have a real opportunity to help with financial literacy, probably more than anywhere else. Now, not every guy is playing at that level. Some go right to the NHL, and now their situation is different. But I think for guys who develop and come up through the minor leagues, that would be tremendously helpful. But that's not going to help everybody. There's no minor leagues for the NFL. There's basically no minor league for the NBA. There is in baseball. I think that's where the real opportunity is. But man, I'd love to see more developed financial literacy for athletes, even just practical things, right? Even if you don't become a professional athlete, things that will help you as an adult would be great.
Well, it's the old adage of more money, more problems, because I've seen guys that have come out of, the American League and even the Canadian Football League who have come out of those leagues, retired, and been more successful financially than guys who are making $8.5 million coming out of the National League or Major League Baseball or any other league. So is it easier to manage a little bit of money than it is to manage bigger money? Is that the lesson?
I mean, what was the Patrick Ewing quote? I make a lot of money, but I spend a lot of money. I mean, that's the problem, right? And it's really difficult. So great example of this. When you're buying a house as an athlete, right? Mortgage companies are happy to throw whatever money you need at them because when you fill out that paperwork and you've got, the salary disclosure and that number is really big, you can basically buy any kind of house you want. For me, my salary over the course of my career is generally going to go up year to year until I retire at age 65, 70, whatever. For an athlete, what you're making in year 30 of that mortgage is going to be nothing compared to what it was in year 1 of that mortgage. And so you can probably buy a lot more house than you can afford long term. And especially, again, if you get injured or there's some sort of issue and you don't have insurance for that, now all of a sudden you've got a real financial problem. Your sort of financial arc over the course of your career is not normal. And you've got to adjust your lifestyle to account for that.
It's almost relatable to the entertainment industry when it comes to actors and artists who are fronted a lot of money. Musicians are fronted a lot of money when they first sign a record deal, but it's like, you better pay that back and you owe me 5 records. It's almost echoing a lot of those things that we hear, the horror stories that we hear in the entertainment industry.
100%. I mean, the issues can be slightly different just by the structure of what they do, but the problems are all basically the same, right? It's celebrity, it's predatory. I mean, I look at a lot of the athletes who've got the really expensive suits on draft night. Where do those come from? Those generally were bought with loans, and generally it's secured by your first contract. Hope you sign that contract, aren't a holdout, and then get injured. Or God forbid, there have been cases where guys die before that contract has been signed. I know it's happened more than once. Now your family's left with some debt and problems. That's obviously a horrible situation, but it happens.
Underlying lesson for any athlete that has, whether it be minor pro, semi-pro, full pro, if you could give one piece of advice first starting out, what is it?
I mean, I think if you start from the perspective that the one person you can trust is yourself and then start building out from there, you're probably going to be way better off than most of the people in the locker room you're in. Just don't trust anyone. No one. Not your parents, not the guys you're teammates with. Trust them on the ice, trust them on the court. When it comes to your financial health, everything they say you got to take with a grain of salt. Not to say that they don't know or they're stupid or anything like that, but you cannot trust them just because you're in the locker room with them or just because maybe something worked out for them. If you start from there and start to build out, now maybe you trust your agent more, you trust your attorney more, trust your financial advisor more, your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the case may be. Grow the circle out from there slowly and carefully. If I had to give one bit of advice, that would be the advice. Obviously, there's a lot more, but I think that's where you start.
Feels like you got a lot more information to share. If people wanted to find you on social media, what's the best way to do that?
So my name is Eido. So if you Google that any which way to Sunday, even if you don't spell it right, you'll find me. But I think the website is www.walnylegal.com. Again, the easiest thing, Google EIDO and you'll find me.
Okay.
I'm curious about the Jonathan Toews situation. I got more questions.
Yeah, good. Absolutely.
Yeah? I always have a million questions. Are you familiar with the Jonathan Toews situation that recently popped out with him and his ex?
A little bit. I know, obviously being from Chicago and being super excited about the Blackhawks winning the Stanley Cup 3 times. I know that he, during COVID, sort of developed long COVID and had some pretty significant health situations. And he's trying to work his way back into the league. And I know that he had a long-term girlfriend who left him at some point. I don't know the details of it, but I know that there was an issue there.
Yeah, I wanted to go into that and I'm just going off of the information that I heard from Brad Richardson, who tells the story. But essentially, long story short, Toews and his missus were together for 15 years-ish, roughly give or take. Seems like he's done his career. She says, "Marry me or I'm leaving." The old Gene Simmons, Shannon tweet. He says, "Listen, I'm not doing that. It's not a good idea." She bounces as re-engaged, or I guess engaged, 6 months later to some other dude.
Yep.
So, what would you advise to a guy like that, where he's got all the money in the world, all the status, everything you could possibly ever imagine? Your missus throws it on you, marry me or else. What would you advise that guy?
I mean, I think anyone tells you do this or else, that's generally something you want to be really careful about.
What if I want your commitment? I want to know that you love me, that we're going to get married. What would you say?
I mean, what do you, if my answer is, what do you feel, right? Like why, so you've been together you're Sidney Crosby, right? You've been together for really long. There's probably reasons you haven't taken this next step. do those reasons hold true? Is there a reason why you don't want to move forward with that? Maybe there's really good reasons. And so I don't want to be told, hey, I have to do something. But if it's something I want to do, then I do it. If it's something I don't want to do, I want someone telling me I have to do that thing.
Yeah, but sometimes the heart screams louder than the brain, man.
I heard
The
this.
heart gets you in a lot of trouble sometimes.
I know.
I got this from somebody way smarter than me, and this is one of those harsh truths that maybe a lot of people may not like to hear, but I heard that women always have problems, and if you start solving her problems, she'll replace them with a new problem. So you're better off to just leave her with the current problem she has, so you don't have to deal with any extra ones. And so in that case, where she's like, I want to live together, I want to move in, I want to take the next step, if you have her working towards that goal continuously, it's in the best interest of everybody, as opposed to when have you ever heard a guy giving her everything she ever wanted and then it ends up working out? She always finds something else she wants. I want to be a stay-at-home wife. I want to work at Starbucks. I hate working. I want to be a stay-at-home wife. So like, is that one of those cases where you would say this is not in your best interest? And how would you advise?
I mean, listen, I've heard a rumor that men and women are pretty different.
I heard that too. Like apples to asparagus.
And so I don't know that this is necessarily limited to just professional athletes. It's true of everybody. And so I think, the relationship problems they have are from that perspective similar to anyone else's. It's just that it's being played out in the public and it's being amplified because of the dollars that are potentially in play. I give a talk all around the country about estate planning mistakes of celebrities and athletes. And at the heart of the talk, it's nothing more than a pretty basic 101 of estate planning. And nobody cares about that, right? If that was the package I was selling people, I'd never get a booking. But because it's sort of rolled up in the celebrity and the names and the gossip that's rolled in, I beat people away with the stick because of how many people want to hear it. And all it is the celebrity nature of it. And so, again, I think it's, I'm not a marriage therapist or anything like that, but I think the athletes have to understand that their problems are the same as everybody else's, but everybody's going to care a lot more about your situation because, if I have a fight with my wife, we just work it out. If an athlete has a fight with their wife, it's going to make the papers. And that is a whole different ballgame.
Well, the thing that I'm hearing, and forgive me if I'm wrong here, but you can insulate yourself financially, you can insulate yourself in so many different ways, but you can't insulate yourself from heartbreak. And that comes in so many different forms, whether it be financially or divorce or whatever, or infidelity. That's the one that you can't protect yourself from. And I think to me, sometimes that's the more important one that you'd want to insulate yourself from. Like some guys, like my kingdom for a horse, some guys would be willing to give it all up just for love, right? Or some people, not just guys. And it's just unfortunate that all of these things have to precede that before it can, be real love.
But I mean, we can debate what real love is, but I mean, I give you the example of Giselle, right? You show me Giselle, maybe the most beautiful woman in the world, and she's had tons of ex-boyfriends. Tom Brady chose to walk away from her. Listen, if that happens to Tom Brady, maybe the best-looking dude in the world, and Giselle, maybe the best-looking female in the world, I mean, good Lord, I'm lucky I have a wife. But this happens, right? Relationships are complicated, and just a regular person's relationship is complicated. But now you're putting, the pressures of signing professional contracts, the pressures of, all these hangers-on, and people trying to sort of get a piece of you. It takes a toll on a relationship, and some people are built for it, and some people aren't. And you got to. I mean, to your point, you just got to be prepared and insulate yourself as much as you can, but you cannot avoid it. It happens to everybody.
Is Brady a good example of, and at least it seems like from what you've seen in the media a little bit, I know the media's, you can't really trust what they say, but he knew that the divorce was coming, and he spent the next year transferring assets into trusts into his mom's name, and then when he pulled the pin, she's like, okay, I'm taking you to Cleaners for half. Sorry, Miss Bunches, Mr. Brady owns nothing.
I think she was actually the breadwinner.
She made more money than he did.
Which is crazy because he could have probably gone after her a little bit, but I think they were both financially set enough that it was just like, all right, you go your way, I'll go mine.
It seems like he just wanted to protect whatever he had.
Probably.
He didn't really care about anything that she had and just move on and, get her out of the house, which, that's like you alluded to, that's a rough spot. It doesn't matter who you are. Like the woman that you love, that you have a family with and kids.
Well, I think all of this is a bigger societal problem that we have, and it reminds me of a one-strip comic that I saw once upon a time where a mother was looking at her daughter getting into her bridal dress in front of a mirror, and she was crying, and she turns around and she goes, Mom, don't get so emotional. It's just marriage. It's not like it's forever, and I don't think people actually listen to those vows anymore that you've taken and I've taken through better and worse. It's like you make this commitment, that means you got to figure things out between the two of you forever. And no one really takes that seriously anymore.
Can I add to you real quick, though? Like, even though you guys are married and I'm not, and me and Dave have had this conversation many times, the game has totally changed since you guys got married.
Sure.
Right? Marriage is an Instagram post, an Instagram story of the ring, the day, the dress.
It's nothing more than a relationship status on social media.
Bingo. And it's not, I'm prepared to serve my husband for the rest of my life and he's prepared to serve me in the best interest of the family and the kids, which is the ultimate goal. It's not about us, it's about them. Is that not an accurate statement?
I mean, I think, so there's a societal issue where marriage is getting commoditized a little bit. I think it's having kids. It's people nowadays having a lot less kids. I mean, I think those statistics are all pretty public. Almost every developed country is having less kids. There's a lot of reasons for that. People are worried about bringing kids into the world. Kids are expensive. Everything's expensive and getting more expensive. I think people worry about marriage. People get worried about getting locked in, this better or worse. And what if I want to change my mind? What if I feel like walking away one day? If we're not married, I can just sort of one day pick up and say, see you later. And if I'm married, it's a lot more complicated than that. The commoditization of marriage is difficult. I think this plays out too with divorce statistics. So I mentioned that with first marriages, the divorce rate's about 46, 47%. By the time you get to your fourth marriage, divorce rates are like 70%. Because at that point, you're sort of like, if it's not you, it'll be the next person. And so those, you just literally commoditize the marriage relationship.
Well, I think those statistics increase even more if you come from a broken home too.
The other crazy thing is the rate of divorce amongst the parents of athletes is very high, especially as you get to very elite athletes, because you tend to have one parent, and it tends to be the dad, saying little Johnny is going to be a star and spending a lot of family money to help develop Johnny. And generally, although not always, it's the mom pulling back and saying, listen, we need to be more reasonable. The odds are not that great. We should be really careful about what we're spending. And that oftentimes leads to divorce. The divorce rates amongst the parents of elite athletes is astronomically high.
Wow. Is there a theme you see? I know we talked about, you see the man, he's chasing excellence, he's getting stuff done, and then that's just not the man that you married anymore. But as far as on the females end, is there any common traits or anything that you usually see and you're like, okay, this is a good predictor?
In terms of female athletes or females who are dating or married to professional athletes? That
are married to professional athletes, where you see them come in, you're with the professional athlete. Okay, I think this might be one of the statistics right here.
I think it's really difficult. It depends, where did you meet this person? Is this somebody who knew you before you were anybody and has been with you for a really long time and has been with you sort of from the point where you had nothing and were nothing? Is this someone you met at some celebrity dinner? Is this someone who stalked you online, right? Where did this person come from? What's their background? What is their family situation? I think there's a lot of variables that could play into that answer.
Man, we need to go back to traditional Indian traditions, arranged marriages. It just seems easier.
Your parents are good enough money. We're marrying for assets right here.
I'll buy you a dowry. Here we go.
A good example, sorry, ADHD here, but like Matt. Him and his missus have literally been together since before right when he was playing in the OHL, and she's been with him ever since. Like, there's your ride or die, as opposed to you're walking out of the Fairmont, Winnipeg, or I guess the Delta now, because nobody stays at the Fairmont anymore. Oh, and I think there's my missus with the big sign, "I love you. You're my favorite player," or the Tyler Seguin effect, where you have security outside the door to stop the ladies from knocking it down.
Well, it's the old Talladega Nights, right? Talladega Nights. Hey, driver, I love you.
Hey, driver, drive these.
Yeah, please be of age. Yeah,
but that happens a lot, right? And if you're some guy who is just playing small town hockey and all of a sudden these things start happening to you, it is easy to fall into how great that is, right? That is give me a piece of that. And that is the path to you getting divorced and you losing a lot of your money.
Well, I brought it up before, Varsity Blues. The girl even admitted, she goes, "You're my ticket out of here." Man.
I think you just made Talladega Nights click in as that is the textbook example of avoid that.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes it's super obvious, but sometimes it ain't obvious at all. And sometimes listen, if you're having kids with someone, right, that generally doesn't happen on the first date, right? There's some investment that's being made to develop a relationship and be with you for a while and maybe have 2 or 3 kids, right? So how are you judging that? How are you getting through that? I mean, that is a long-term series of some kind of relationship. you've got to navigate that. You've got to be careful. It is not the person who is, flashing their shirt after a game. That's easy.
Yeah. Is that one of those things where, like you mentioned, if you're an athlete, you have to treat yourself as if you're special because you're a target. If you're that athlete with that status, that cash, that fame, and the missus or the lady who's trying to, I guess, reproduce with you, she has that clock that's ticking down that we really don't have for the most part. And so, okay, well, there's another avenue that she could take advantage if she has baby rabies.
I mean, it's a factor, obviously. The clocks are different. It's really interesting. I've got some clients where both spouses were professional athletes. And so that creates a whole interesting dynamic with the relationship and how they treat each other and their off seasons and how they're planning on having families. I mean, that's a whole different, weird, interesting, really interesting dynamic. I think it helps them understand each other a little bit better. But even then, I mean, you're talking about dramatically disproportionate numbers in terms of salaries. I mean, there just aren't very many female athletes making as much as professional men athletes. They can do well, but that's an issue.
Is that why, kind of like with celebrity actors, they try to find other actors, musicians find musicians, athletes find athletes?
At least you understand each other a little bit more, at least the industry, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it happens sometimes, but there's certainly plenty of examples of people who've come out and said, I never want to date it. Celebrities who say, I never want to date a celebrity. You can never tell their intentions. Are they using me for sort of marketing purposes to help prop up their own careers? It's complicated.
So there is no right answer.
Well,
there's never.
When we had Rich Cooper on the last episode, I mentioned something where I said that my wife and I, she was a very successful model, and she decided to give up that career in order to raise our children. And she has been doing that for the past 13 years, and I give her full credit. And Rich said, because I said to her, she's got the hardest job in the world of, raising the family and taking care of the house. And he pitched the idea of, is it really that hard? And I went home and I thought about that, and I'd like to bring it to you to see what you think. And I think the reason why it has the tag of hardest job in the world is the three of us go out, we work, we see benefits from that within 2 weeks, right? We get a paycheck, we're able to take that. Where being a stay-at-home mom, the long-term investment is 20, 30 years down the road when you see that human being rise to their full potential, and most of the credit goes towards that stay-at-home mom, the one that had that nurturing household, that had the function of no, this is the way you do things at home, this is how you raise a house. And because there's no immediate payoff week to week to week or month to month to month or even year to year, that's where it becomes the hardest job in the world, because the payoff is way down the road. It's way down the road. And I think sometimes maybe we don't recognize that, the sacrifice that the women put in, and even in these situations that we've been talking about, is that maybe they just don't feel appreciated. Like, hey, I decided to step away from my career. Like, I could have gone on and been A, B, or Z in a career, but instead we decided to focus on yours. I took a back seat, and maybe that's where some of that visceral hate comes from down the road, and that's why we have these really ugly divorces. I'm just bringing out ideas here, but I think sometimes we're not giving enough credence to what they go through, being the second banana.
I mean, I think when you think about what your value as an employee, right? Forget about being a professional athlete, really any kind of employee. What is your value? You judge that often by the paycheck that you're bringing home. And I think one of the reasons, forget about long-term payoff, when you're a spouse who's at home taking care of the kids, and sometimes it's the male in the relationship, no one's paying you for that, right? But it's hard. You've got to set your own schedule, right? You're not just sitting on the couch eating bonbons all day. There's things that have to get done. You've got to set your own schedule. You've got to stay on the ball. Now you add all the things that go into a professional athlete, right? So we see pretty frequently that the athlete is off doing their athlete things, right? Working out, team activities, playing, all of that. It leaves the spouse at home to deal with the lawyer, the financial advisor, buying the house, dealing with the house when you get traded, dealing with the dogs, dealing with the kids. That's a lot. And no one's paying you for that. And so I think the mentality sometimes is, well, that's literally not a job because you're not getting paid. When in reality, it is the hardest job because you're not getting paid, right? If you were getting half of someone's salary to do that job, then that would be different. But I think when you start thinking about, well, if the spouse didn't do that and we hired people, right, a nanny, a this, a that, it's a lot you're going to shell out to deal with all that. And instead, it's your spouse who's dealing with it. It's hard. It's important. And if that person does a bad job, it's going to have a lot of really negative effects for the athlete, who either is going to have to do it on their own, which they probably don't have time to do, or start hiring people where now you've got to go through all the things of hiring people and background checks and they're going to be in your house dealing with your kids. Talk about sort of walking around and opportunities for criminality. It's a whole nother ball of wax.
Do you think to some degree, though, that when it comes to like the male-female dynamic, the old saying, it's harsh again, but a man will trade his happiness for his family. Sometimes a woman will trade her family for her happiness. And if you have her taking care of the family, well, I'm not getting paid. Like you mentioned, real delayed gratification. If she's not in it for the long-term goal of we're making something more important than us, the kids, the family, she might pull the pin on that. But also, to counter Rich's point, I would argue that like the game has changed. It's probably just as hard to find a woman who's willing to stay at home and commit to the family as it is to find a man who's willing to provide, with how much the game has changed and how everybody thinks they have endless options.
And how do you know when you're getting in the relationship? And how do you know what someone's motives are, right? You can't read, even Elon Musk still can't read someone's mind. Certainly not accurately.
He's working on it. He's working on it.
I know they're working on it, but at least today, you can't do it. And so you're relying on what your eyes are telling you, what your heart is telling you, which lies to you a lot, what you're seeing and observing. But even then, people can hide their motivations. You got to trust yourself. You got to be really careful. You got to make good decisions, because at the end of the day, you got to be accountable to yourself. But it's hard. Relationships in general are hard. But now you add all the metrics that go into a professional athlete. It's all the harder.
Wow. Well, what an episode this has been. I really enjoyed this. I don't know about you, Dave. This has been enlightening.
This is great. And I appreciate you making the trek up here, man. I really, really do.
And also for this, look, if you're in the video version, look at this puppy. Is it on here? Yeah, look at this puppy. Look at how nice this mug is. Thank you, my friend.
Really encourage anyone, if you're in Aurora, Illinois, go to Stan Mikita's Donuts.
Better than
and that donut shop showed up after the movie?
It doesn't exist.
It's not even real? Okay, good.
Don't go there.
Hey, man, it's better than Sing Hortons. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to Sling the Biscuit. That is Eido Walny. Also, if you're in his area, re-elect him to be president of his village coming up soon. You can contact him at the website walnyforbayside.com.
No, walnylegal.com.
Walnylegal.com. I'll put a link in the video description. It's probably easier, but we do new episodes every single Sunday. My name is Travis Ridgen. That is Dave Wheeler, sexiest man in the city, top professional hockey goaltender. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.